Welcome to Two Guys and a Question. Today, Alan and Danny explore what happens when funeral professionals shift from a passive mindset to an active, engaging approach with families.
I'm Alan Creedy.
I'm Danny Jefferson.
And we're Two Guys and a Question. And Danny, I had an interesting experience today. We got a serviceman here working on the furnace. His company had trained him. They've obviously got a very good training program. When he met me at the door to introduce himself, he went through his process, which is clearly well-defined. And it caused me to be very aware of the difference in what you and I are trying to accomplish with our clients and what most people consider to be training. And I've got a little jar on my desk that's got $3 bills in it now, because we're not allowed to use the word training, and why skills development is the better term. So let me lead off by making this observation. When you have a prescribed process and a prescribed system, you automatically have boundaries and guardrails. All right? You do certain things, you don't do certain other things. The methodology, mechanism, whatever you want to call it, that you espouse is wholly different in that it's pretty free-ranging. Your insistence that it begin with questions caused me to realize, in comparison with this gentleman who's doing the service, what he did right in the beginning of the conversation after giving me his name was to create a frame for what he was going to do today. In much the same way, your questions create that same frame. And here's the way I finally saw this, and that is that when you go into a arrangements interview with a family that you don't know, and I need to emphasize that, you are effectively entering a dark room. The blinds are drawn, the lights are off, it is dark. You can't see that couch you're going to trip over, you can't see where the doors are or the windows are or whatever. And neither can the family. They don't do this. People may make a funeral arrangement once or twice or three times in their lifetime. Non-comfort zone or out of their comfort zone experience. So what you do when you start with your questions, and your first question is often about the deceased, tell me about your mom. What you're really doing is creating a frame that says, we're here about your mom. When you ask the question of, have you ever made funeral arrangements before? You're turning a light on for yourself and then helping you understand where you need to begin.
Right.
What we've come to realize, and I'll let you speak to this, is that whereas for 150 years, this profession has really been built on what I'm going to refer to as a passive model. And there's very good reasons for it being a passive model. I'm not criticizing that. But what is confusing to funeral directors today and to the profession at large is that the current market is asking us to transition from a passive model to an active model. Active model in terms of your approach to the questioning.
The reason that we're having this discussion, we talked about this earlier, was that passive to active.
Yes.
One of the things you get when it's active is you get to find out what the family wants, not what you offer.
And that's an important point, because my belief is that the majority of people who come to make funeral arrangements don't know what they want. And so what the profession has been doing of late is been say, let me share with you all your options. What your questioning approach does is as you're turning the lights on for yourself, you're also turning the lights on for them. You're helping them figure out what's important to them, what's not important to them, how they can and maybe want to honor the deceased in whatever way. And by the way, one of the things that you bring to bear that I want to tell our audience is you actually, and you do this deliberately, I don't think you realize it anymore because you've done it for so long, is you personify the deceased. You don't refer to ashes, you refer to your mom,
Right.
etc.
The wonderful thing about meeting with families is you learn about them, you get to know them, they get to know you. It's a conversation.
So let me ask you a question. How can you know how to help a family if you don't know them?
That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Is that not arrogant?
If you've been listening to these podcasts, you know that I've been in over 190 funeral homes in the past 2 or 3 years making arrangements for my mom. And not one asked me about my mom. Not one. It's sad. So what we're talking about this morning, what we're talking about on this podcast is you have got to talk about the deceased. You have got to ask questions. How long has your dad been sick? Where was he when he first got sick? What did they diagnose? How long has he had to deal with this?
About how much like your approach improvisational comedy is. I think we need to help our audience understand that the question approach that you take is not linear. You weave and you bob and you reverse and you go forward. I don't want to overcomplicate it. That's not my point. But your process of interviewing is not unlike the Dale Carnegie approach to making friends and influencing people.
Right.
You're trying to understand what the world looks like to them. And I go back to the metaphor, and I'll go back to it again, I'm sure, is you're going into a dark room. You're not only turning the lights on for you through your questioning approach, you're turning the lights on for them. So that at the end of however many minutes, and it can be 4 minutes and it can be an hour.
When you get talking with a family, the conversation has got to flow. And when I flow, Alan referred to bobbing and weaving. You take the response that they give you and you glean another question from that. For instance, my dad had a cancer that he derived from where he worked. Obviously, the next question is easy. Where did your dad work? What did he do? What was his occupation? How long was he in that occupation? So you can understand, and this takes practice. It takes active practice.
And I think that's a critical point, because what we are asking people to do in moving from a passive approach to an active approach is truly pushing them out of their comfort zone. But it is so effective. It is so powerful that once they have assimilated and started to master what you share, it's so profoundly better for the family and for them that they'll never go back.
When you find out what their occupation was, one of the questions you could ask is, did that occupation impact what was going on with them as far as the way they died?
Yeah.
You can ask them, how has this impacted you?
Right.
Now, all of a sudden, you're asking them about their feelings. How do they feel?
Right.
Now they are getting the sense that you actually care enough about them that you're asking a question. I would tell you all the times that I went in those funeral homes, nobody ever asked me what I did.
What happens is you're not only framing things, you are very subtly introducing, and I call it self-discovery for the family. You're introducing options they were not either aware of or hadn't considered or thought about. And what you're doing for yourself, let's go back to the turning the lights on metaphor, you're creating a visual in your mind of the service that you can now recommend that they think about. Not that you are saying this is what you want. That is not how you operate. But that you are saying it sounds like.
Right.
How do you say it?
What I am hearing you say is, and then it's a callback. You just call back what they said.
And you create this in their minds. They have the option, and it's obvious from the way you do it that they're allowed to do this. They have the option to say, no, Mr. Jefferson, but let's think about this. And then you can explore their response. Probably most of the time they go, Yeah, that
Right.
sounds right. And this is important. You give them a ballpark number. You don't sit there and list it all out. You say, I think I can do that for $11,000. Does that sound like it might fit your budget? And then you start that process over again.
Always remember that the segue, and a segue is that whatever that is, that you go from one type of a conversation to a
transition.
different. Yeah, it's a transition. That transition can be a question.
And yeah, very often it is a question.
And when you transition, you're not trying to change the subject. You're trying to solidify so you can understand. And this takes practice. It takes active practice.
And
So the segue of what we're trying to say is that when you transition from one particular part of the conversation to another.
And for our audience, we've defined earlier, there are three major pieces to the approach that you take. We got the interview piece, which we've been talking about today. We have the privacy policy, which is a very physical type of segue. And now we're into the recommendation phase.
What I am hearing you say is,
Yes.
that is the question.
Yep.
You can ask that question any way you choose to ask it, but you essentially have to say, so to wrap this up, what I am hearing you say, or what I'm hearing you say is, you want a service, you want it Saturday, you want to use a wood casket, we'll choose in just a little bit. He will be buried at Smith Church.
And I think it's important for the audience to realize or understand that is what you're doing is you're creating a visual frame for them.
Right.
And you're giving them something to respond or react to. It's not a contentious situation. It's not a sales pitch. It's a confirmation or affirmation of what they have been talking to you about the entire time without having to go to a display book or the selection room or anything else. You are helping them. But the other thing that's important here, and this is really critical from my perspective, is that when you take that approach, what I'm hearing you say, based on what we've been talking about, it sounds like, whatever it might be, this is where the collaboration part starts.
And the collaboration really is just assuring them that's what I heard. And if it's not what they said, they will let you know.
Yeah.
That's the next part. They will say, I don't know if I want it Saturday. I think maybe we ought to have it Sunday.
Or they
something
might
like
say,
that.
I'm not really sure that we should be bringing his horse into the viewing. Maybe could we have the horse out in the parking lot?
But if he had a horse, it'd be great if somebody would ride it to the cemetery, lead the hearse.
See, now you're creating pictures again. See, and I think that's the fundamental shift that's occurred here in the funeral director's mind. And I'm not criticizing Danny. Please don't misunderstand me. This is because of 150 years of legacy. We're thinking ritual. We're thinking ceremony. We're thinking structure. And that's fine. And that's appropriate. And in fact, most families want something along those lines. But they also want to know that they've done what they can do to make sure everybody understands that the deceased life mattered.
Connect, learn, lead. Be sure and listen every week for another podcast from Alan and Danny. You can do it, and they can help.